What's happening, financial coaches? Pete here. Want to talk to you today about a little rule that I have. And it's basically saying that all financial coaching components do not have to be in every financial coaching session. And that may sound obvious to you, or maybe you disagree with it. But I have seen people who go into a financial coaching session and they have their notepad and they have their process of financial coaching and motivation identification and history and progress and post past successes and current successes and future outlook and milestones and blah blah blah, and the whole nine yards. And what they try to do is they try to, in every session, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour, to get through all of that. Have we identified the motivation? Did we look at the backstory and what they find a success and where they get their confidence and who's their accountability partner and all these types of things. And the problem with that is those are tools and components of being an effective coach. But it doesn't mean that every one of those applies uh, not only to everyone but every session, right? So in some cases, people may come in strongly motivated, and it might be fine to ask them what that is. And in some cases, it might be obvious what it is, right? Maybe the electricity's turned off in their house and they want to get it turned on. Yeah, probably don't need to dive deep into the motivation on that. It's because they want the lights on and the air conditioning running and the refrigerator back on and to be able to charge their cell phone, right? So some of these things and being beholden to the process of checking off all the checkboxes. And in one case, I was looking at someone's checkbox and they basically evaluated themselves post the session on how many of those check boxes they checked off. And it was 122 components to a successful financial coaching session. And if they didn't have 70% of them or more, they considered it not very effective coaching. And what I would say is that I think it could be effective coaching if you didn't check any of them off. And one of the reasons is, you could do nothing but say hello and goodbye, and someone might get everything they need out of that. It's just the way things work sometimes. Sometimes people just need an ear to listen, and they just need a channel to discuss and to vent and to kind of think through out loud some of the things that they're considering, and they'll come up with their own solutions. And that would be great. It would be a really easy way to make money and to say, hey, how are you? How are things going? And then just have them, let's say the session's for an hour, go 59 minutes, come up with their own action plan, goals, next steps, timeline, the whole nine yards, and say, hey, this was great. Thanks for your help. And you hang up. And I wouldn't be able to check off very many of those checklist items. And the problem with it, and what I see on the post surveys of those, so I've been diving into data on those, is that one of the most common pieces of feedback that you get when people were using highly scripted coaching sessions was that it felt scripted, that it didn't feel customized, it didn't feel like the coach was particularly listening, and it didn't feel like they really got the value out of it that they couldn't have gotten by using a worksheet. And in some cases, one person wrote that I'm not sure why I was in the session. I didn't get anything out of it that I didn't already know. And so I think those are pretty fair. They're a little harsh, and I think you got to take it, and you've got to take those criticisms and say, especially when they are harsh, and maybe they even like the coach. So maybe they're not as harsh as they could be, and say, what are we doing wrong? And the issue here to me is that as a coach, you are inundated with all these training and how to uncover the motivation and how to uncover their value system and priorities and things like this. And especially if you go through a very heavy coach training, one of the tendencies I've seen is that people tend to come out of them and be very literal, be very rigid, and kind of consumed with worry. Am I going to do this right? And what ends up happening is that the coaching sessions are terrible, not because they are not using the components, but that they're overusing the components, that they are lacking the free flow of a conversation, that it doesn't feel natural, that they're not making those connections, that they're not letting people just kind of ramble or drift sometimes that they want to. There isn't the humor injected into the conversations. There isn't the sharing of emotions and connections and the roller coaster of feelings sometimes because you're so worried about checking off an item off your list or whatnot. So I think it's really important to not necessarily feel like the more components of a successful coaching call it appears in every call. I think where mastery comes in is that you have all of these things in your mind, right? You know how things work. You know how you can go through goal identification and then breaking it down into steps and asking them how they can commit to those things, right? And the key is now as you get into that relationship in that conversation with people, you are going to kind of pull out the pieces as you need them, and it's going to feel very comfortable. It's going to feel very natural, and in many cases, I don't think the participants should know that they're being coached or feel like it is, or feel like there's almost a professional client relationship. They're going to feel more like a peer. You're going to feel like a friend. I've made lots of friendships with people that I started working with professionally and learned a lot from them as well. And we got on the phone and they were fun because sometimes that's what people needed, more of a release or a moment to be encouraged. Other times people needed to kind of buckle down and be given more direction. And sometimes it was just more education, and you won't necessarily tick all those things off. All right. For example, I don't think if you're working on one project over 7 sessions that we need to revisit the motivation over those, right? If you watch my earlier video, I talked about a participant who had just got her electricity turned back on, and she didn't have money to feed herself for the weekend, and she was dealing with a credit card minimum payment that she couldn't make and all these other things. And it was obvious why she needed to get these things under control, because she wanted to eat, she wanted to have her lights on, right? And so over the next 7 sessions, which were, as I said, very compact in a short time period, I didn't need to ask her motivation. Now that wouldn't have done very um, good things for my score on how many components, right? If I left motivation off every one of my coaching calls, someone would look at that and say you're missing a big piece of it. But it just means that you don't have to revisit that in every call. Now, if we pivot, we get her out of that triage, that emergency situation, and now she says, "Hey, I want to start saving for an emergency. I want to start putting away money, into a savings account and not touch it and those types of things." All right, now we're pivoting and now we're moving off onto another goal. So now we can kind of go through that process again. And maybe I'm going to start revisiting and asking more of the more basic things, because we're kind of setting up a whole new framework, a whole new goals here. So those are the types of things that I want to encourage you to think about. If you have your checklist, I'm not opposed to it. But don't necessarily score yourself on how many you hit in every call, and treat every call in the context of the broader picture of where you're trying to go with this client. And maybe a lot of this has been done in your early session number one or your discovery session. But, be normal about it. Be yourself about it. Be comfortable. Put your clients at ease, and don't feel stiff. Don't feel scripted. Go with the flow, and I think better things will happen. You'll have more influence and better connections with people when they don't feel like they're being coached. So that's my thought for today. Hopefully that helps. See you later.